So it's important to remember that, and we saw at the beginning, that there was a lot of public attention paid to Somalia when the operation started, a great deal of fanfare, a great deal of optimism, a great deal of public support. But as the operation kind of morphed and changed in these ways that I've talked about, public's attention went elsewhere. It wasn't sustained. And as you see on this graph here shows two things. First, it's showing you how much media coverage there was of events in Somalia during 1993 between the decision to go in and the Black Hawk Down episode. And it also shows you in the red diamonds how many people said they were paying attention to events that were going on there. And what you can see here is that even there was a great deal of attention at the outset, and then it plummets. Media coverage dropped off, attentiveness dropped off. And so as the mission was changing in this very important way to getting us more deeply embroiled in the civil war there, most Americans were not paying attention. Right? What snapped them back to attention were the horrible images coming out on October 3rd and 4th from this Black Hawk Down incident. You can see another spike in media coverage associated with that. The immediate response was a precipitous decline in public support for the operation in Somalia. What I'm showing here on this graph is data that we have culled from a large number of US military operations that shows a relatively well-established relationship between public support and the level of US battle deaths. Now, there's a lot of interesting variation here. You can see World War II as a case where public support remained quite high, even in the face of large numbers of battle deaths. Most military operations, Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, even the more recent one in Afghanistan, follow a very familiar curve where they start off quite popular but then decline quite predictably as battle deaths increase. But then you see the one outlier here, Somalia, which also started off very popular. But in response to a tragic, yes, but still relatively small number of American deaths, public support withered away faster than it had in any other operation. Okay. Now, some of this is driven by the perception that we didn't have a real national interest at stake there. A sense the American public didn't fully understand why it was that people we had gone overseas to help rescue from a famine were celebrating in the streets as our soldiers were dead. And indeed, there's some evidence that people who saw those images reacted somewhat differently from people who did not see those images. So in this graph here, what I'm showing you is people were given different options in terms of how we should respond to the events in Somalia. They could support increasing US commitment, keeping US forces the same, gradually withdrawing US troops, or immediately withdrawing US troops. And as you can see from this graph, people who saw the images, 50% of them wanted to get out immediately, whereas only 33% of people who didn't see the images wanted to get out immediately. So it's quite clear that that people who were attentive to that responded in a different way. Okay. Having said that, it would be incorrect to then assume that the US public's response would lead to an immediate end of the operation. It is true that there was a move in Congress to push for an immediate withdrawal of US troops. But President Clinton resisted it to the extent that he was willing to, which is to say that people at the UN were very nervous that if the US pulled out immediately, that the entire UN operation would collapse. It would be left in tatters. And President Clinton was also nervous that an immediate withdrawal of American troops would send the wrong message, that the moment we were bloodied, we would run. So in fact, Clinton announced that US troops in the area would in fact increase. He sent more forces to the region. In fact, 5,000 new troops to Somalia and increased naval forces that brought the total US presence in the region to 20,000. And he said that they would go for at least 6 months. By March 31st, they would go out as a way to help ease the transfer away from American forces to an entirely UN mission. And in spite of the fact that there were many in Congress who wanted to get out immediately, President Clinton's position prevailed. He was able to muscle Congress into supporting a 6-month extension of the operation. What we don't know is whether Clinton could have, had he wanted to, pushed for an even more extensive US involvement. We don't know this because it's pretty clear that Clinton didn't want to. This was not his baby. This was not his priority. with the loss of public support, it would have taken political capital to fight for Somalia, and he certainly did not want to spend political capital this way. So the US would, though, after initially increasing its forces, by March 31st, 1994, US forces would leave Somalia.